So here are our center positions, and say we run k-means with 2, 4, 6, or 8 clusters. So this is just stating again what I already pointed out, what our artificial clusters are, and I point out you get different answers each time. You can fix the seeds if you want to get reproducible answers. Because you can even, if you have random starting points and random data, both are different each time. But if you fix the seeds for all of those, you will get the same answer each time. And as I pointed out, we're going to change that 20 to 1 to produce more amusing results. And so here we have the first example. These are the small clusters. They're quite compact, very obvious. There's no no question about which point runs to which cluster. And this particular run was for 2 clusters. Remember, there are 4 total. So what it's done is taken, of the 4 clusters, is taken these 2 and made them 1 cluster. That's why they're colored blue with the center here. Notice the center is nowhere near any of the points. And as the other 2 formed another cluster, and the center is here. And it's outputted the value of the distortion, which is the mean value of the distance between the points and the centers. And this one was run with 20 iterations, and the max mean of 1 means that the test on quality was done on the average value of the distortion. And all the results in this particular lesson will have the parallelism parameter set to 1. If you look at this graph title, I've just gone through it in what it has. There's the number of clusters running from 2 to 8. It has the parallelism. It has this max mean value, which is in more detail, judging by the mean distortion for 1 and the maximum distortion of 2. There is a number of independent iterations, number of different center starting positions used, and we minimize the distortion measure as we run over these iterations controlled by max mean. So this here is the actual core we use, and this is the version I wrote, which has max mean as an argument and parallelism as an argument. As I say, parallelism is 1 for this set of runs. Max mean, we sometimes look at 1 or 2, usually 1, and we just add those 2 parameters to the basic k-means, which is given by Python. And so we can go through these parameters that what you'd expect, that the points to be clustered, the number of clusters, the value of k we want to find, the number of iterations, which I said ran from 1 to 20. Within each iteration, we actually have to converge. So remember, we have 2 convergences. The outer loop over center positions, we converge on the goodness of the quality of fit controlled by max mean. Within a given choice of centers, we're looking for a local minima, so we don't have to worry too much about the criteria, because as it's a local minimum, it's probably pretty robust to small changes. And so the value of thresh, which is I think 10 to the minus 5, is you stop when the distortion, the change in the distortion is less than this value of thresh. So this controls within each center iteration how many times you iterate k-means. And parallelism, as I mentioned, is always 1 for this lecture, and max mean is usually 1. That's the usual Python k-means, and 2 is an alternative quality measure we'll discuss later on. We will point out there's some cases where testing on the maximum is better than testing it, probably better than testing on the mean distortion. So here's another example. This has iteration of 20. This has the large clusters, not the small clusters. The scales here are different because these points are more spread, so to keep them in the plot, we have to run this scale to 5. Again, we have 2 here clustered together with a center here. These 2 here are clustered together with a center here. Notice I pointed out the clusters at the top are somewhat larger than the clusters at the bottom. That's just the input radii of the clusters. So there's nothing deep about that. That's just what I put in when I generated these clusters. And remember, these particular points differ from run to run because these are randomly generated with this Gaussian distribution. Here's another example. Here, actually, we get a point, which is, remember, this points out that this actually does vary from iteration to iteration. This point here is actually at above 6, and so we have an even lot, whereas the previous example was smaller. In fact, this is the very large clustering. Previous case was large, so this is a larger radius by 50%, so it's not surprising it extends much further. And these now clusters have sort of joined here, actually. These two ones are centered at x equals 0 and y equals 0 and y equals 3. And here we have a center, which looks a pretty good center here, and a pretty good center here. And this is probably roughly the best type of clustering you could do. But if you did want to do two clusters for this particular sample. Here's another example of 4 clusters with the small clustering, so very compact clusters. Clearly, it finds what you would hope it would find, that each of those individual compact clusters, which I made as separate clusters, has turned out to be separate. All of these things have 20 iterations. Here we have the k equals 4 for large clustering, and it looks pretty nice. Here we have the very large clustering, k equals 4, it's gone well. Gain is spread out with a point at near above 6. Now we do something which who knows what it's meant to do, because we're asking for 6 clusters with a sample which only has 4. So in this particular example here, which is the large case with k equals 6, it's actually done something which is probably what you might have expected to do if it was going to get the right answer. It's kept the 2 smaller clusters at the bottom as one cluster, and it's chopped the 2 clusters at the top each into 2 separate clusters. So remember, we pointed out that clustering is sometimes used to find separated entities, and for here, you can find some algorithms tell you that k equals 4 was the best choice to make, because as soon as you get to k equals 6, you are getting geometrically compact regions. These are more compact than the original case with k equals 4, but they are not clearly separated, and they're going to be variants of these clusters which rotate this dividing line through the original cluster. Here is large clustering, and here it's actually done something really rather different, showing how, and this I deliberately ran with 1 iteration so I could get funny answers. And you can see it's got some sort of interesting result. It's taken this medium-sized cluster here and chopped it into 3. And these big clusters are chopped into, at least assigned to proper clusters. So it's got 3 good clusters. The thing which was 1 cluster has been chopped into 3. It is doubtful that this is the optimal solution for this case. And if I'd run with iterations of 20, I would have got a different solution. Now we have k equals 8, even more extreme case. And here we did 20 iterations. This compact cluster here is just 1. This medium-sized one here is 2. This medium-sized one is 3. I think this is the largest one. It is also 3. So we have 3, 2, 2, 1 is how we do the k equals 8 for the large clusters. Here is another case, 1, 3. He's taken the actual smallest cluster. And here, although this case here, it's actually joined in some points here, which I'm not quite certain where they come from. This bigger cluster, probably these 2 probably come from that big cluster. But for this solution, they're nearest this center here. And so here's an example of I'm running iteration of 1 here to get sort of interesting local minima, which are not necessarily global minima in terms of minimizing the average distortion. And here's an interesting case, which we'll discuss a little more, for which sort of intrigued me. So we have actually the small clusters. We have actually 20 iterations, so it's actually ought to get a good answer. And we expected if we clustered the 4 small clusters into 2, we would do 2 and 2. Then we would get a solution like those 2 were a cluster, these 2 were a cluster, or these 2 were a cluster, and those 2 were a cluster. But actually what it's done is made these 3 one cluster, and this single cluster one cluster. So it's done a very different solution. And we'll have a few more, we have a slide or 2 on that later on. And this is actually another iteration of 20. I think the previous one was also here. So these are both iterations of 20. And this is showing for the 20, actually, this is a good solution because it ran through a lot of possibilities. And it's the symmetry related version rather than doing these 3 is 1, is done. The next plot has got these 3 as 1. So for any of these types of solution, if you write down one of them, you can always rotate them with the symmetry of the problem and get related ones. With exactly which solution you get, you can never, it's not so obvious. So this is what you'd expect to actually have got. This is coming back. This is again k equals to 20 iterations. In this case here, it's got the 2 and 2. What you would, I guess I would have expected to be the natural solution.